Welcome and hello. If you found your way here, you're probably somewhere comfortable. Lights down low, phones set aside, the particular kind of quiet that only really happens late at night when everything else has finally stopped demanding things of you. I hope that's where you are. Tonight we're going to sit with one of the great stories. Not great in the sense of morally instructive or formally literary, though it's a bit of both, but great in the way that the best stories are, sprawling and complicated and full of people making choices you can see coming from miles away while somehow still making your heart sink when they do it anyway. This is the story of Anakin Skywalker. And yes, that's the other one too, Darth Vader, the breathing, the cape, the helmet that's become one of the most recognizable images in cinema. But Vader is only part of it. The beginning is a little boy on a desert planet who builds things out of salvage and has never left the only world he knows. And the ending, I think the ending is one of the most quietly devastating redemptions I've encountered in any story, and it earns every single moment of what comes before it. We'll cover the full arc tonight, starting before the films technically begin and carrying through to the end of Return of the Jedi. I'll bring in material from the Clone Wars animated series where it adds something meaningful, and a few details from the comics and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that fill in gaps the films didn't have time to address. The broad shape of this is something most people know, but there's a lot of texture in the details, and texture is what makes something worth spending a couple of hours with. I've come back to this story a fair number of times over the years, and what I get from it shifts slightly, depending on when I'm watching. Sometimes it reads as a story about grief, what it does to people when they have no real way of processing it, when the sadness just sits there accumulating weight. Sometimes it reads as a story about institutions failing someone who needed something they simply weren't set up to give. And sometimes it reads as the most expensive Greek tragedy ever committed to film, which honestly just makes you admire the scale of it. All three of those readings are accurate. None of them is the whole picture. That's rather why the story keeps being worth returning to. There's something I find genuinely interesting, by the way, about the fact that this entire saga is called the Skywalker Saga, named after Anakin, and yet Anakin spends the majority of it in a mask, saying very little that's personal and revealing almost nothing about who he actually is underneath the armor. He's everywhere in the story, and somehow always slightly absent from it, like a shadow at the center of everything. That's always struck me as quietly fascinating. The whole galaxy orbits a man you barely get to actually meet until the very final minutes. It's also, I think, a particularly good story for late nights. It's familiar enough that you can follow it half asleep, but detailed enough that if you're listening closely, there's always something slightly new. A detail you'd forgotten, or one you hadn't quite registered before. The kind of story where you already know the shape of what's coming and the specifics still land. Good company, essentially. The sort you want in a room when it's dark. And at its core, underneath all the Force philosophy and the political machinations and the lightsaber choreography, it's really a story about what happens when someone loves too much and fears too deeply, and has no one around who quite knows how to help with either of those things, which is a very human problem, even when it's happening to someone who can crush you with a thought. A few practical things before we start. I'm following the story chronologically tonight, beginning where The Phantom Menace begins and ending where Return of the Jedi ends. I'll move at a comfortable pace. There's no quiz, no rush, no payoff to stay awake for. Each section is more or less self-contained, so if you drift off somewhere around section 9, that's exactly what this is here for. If you enjoy this sort of thing, long, unhurried storytelling about fictional universes and real ones, there's a subscribe button somewhere around here. Entirely up to you, but it does help keep things going. The galaxy of Star Wars is enormous. Thousands of planets, hundreds of species, a history stretching back millennia before any of the films begin. And the thing which ultimately determines the fate of all of it is a choice made by one man on a lava planet on a day that was already going very badly. That's the kind of story this is. Intimate at its core despite the scale. About a specific fear, a specific failure of the people who should have done better, and a specific act of love at the very end. Right then, let's go back a long, long time ago to a galaxy far, far away, specifically to its least impressive corner, which is, perhaps fittingly, where this whole extraordinary thing begins. Tatooine is, by most measures, a genuinely terrible planet. 2 suns, minimal water, most of the surface covered in sand that gets into everything, and a population that's roughly divided between moisture farmers trying to scrape a living out of near nothing and organised crime figures making their living off the people doing the scraping. The Galactic Republic has no presence there. No senators representing it, no Jedi stationed nearby, no particular reason for anyone with options to stay. It is, as Obi-Wan Kenobi will eventually describe it, as if the planet is furthest from the bright centre of the universe. This is where Anakin Skywalker grows up. He's born some years before the films begin. The canonical placement puts his birth around 41 BBY, which stands for before the Battle of Yavin, the battle in A New Hope, where Luke destroys the Death Star. So roughly 41 years before that, he's born into slavery, which is already about as far as you can get from prophesied chosen one as a starting position. The galaxy doesn't do irony on a small scale. His mother is Shmi Skywalker. She's worth knowing a bit about because she's the emotional foundation of essentially everything that follows. Shmi had been captured and sold into slavery as a young girl. She came from elsewhere entirely, was moved through several owners across the galaxy, ended up first with a Hutt crime lord named Gardulla on Tatooine, and then, when Gardulla lost a gambling bet, became the property of a Toydarian junk dealer named Watto. Watto had a junk shop in the city of Mos Espa, and that's where Anakin spent his childhood, in a small hovel on Slave Quarters Row, working in a junkyard under the twin suns. Shmi couldn't explain how Anakin had been conceived. There was no father. She simply found herself pregnant one day, and then she had a son. The films don't dwell on this, and we'll come back to it properly in the next section when it becomes relevant. But it's worth planting the flag here. There was genuinely no explanation. She just had him. What Shmi gave Anakin, in the circumstances she had to give anything in, was remarkable. She taught him how to fix things, mechanical aptitude, the ability to look at something broken and understand intuitively what was wrong with it. She taught him that he deserved more than the life they had. She taught him compassion, and she meant it as practical guidance rather than sentiment. The world is hard, she was saying, and you'll need to be softer than it expects. On difficult nights, when the desert had finally cooled to something survivable, she would tell him a story about a creature called the Sun Dragon, a beast who lived inside the core of a star, guarding everything it treasured, who could survive anything because it had the biggest heart in the galaxy. She told him he was the Sun Dragon. She wanted him to understand that his capacity for love was a strength, not a weakness, that someone could use against him. I think about that story a lot in context of everything that follows. The thing his mother tried hardest to give him is exactly the thing the world used against him. I don't know. There's something in that. He was also, by any measure you cared to apply, extraordinary. His reflexes were such that he could pilot a pod racer at 9 years old, competing against adult professional pilots, some of them alien species with biological advantages that should have made the competition absurd. He almost always won. The specific gift was partly speed of processing, partly something else. He seemed to know what was about to happen a fraction of a second before it did. He'd react to things that weren't there yet. The cockpit felt natural to him in a way that didn't entirely make sense. He had also, by this point, built himself a protocol droid, C-3PO. Yes, that one. Built from salvaged parts in Watto's junk shop, assembled piece by piece over years, intended to help his mother with translation and general household tasks. He was 9 years old, building a sentient artificial intelligence from spare parts. No notes, really. Watto himself is worth a sentence. He was not, by the standards of slave holders, the worst sort. He didn't beat them regularly. He let Anakin race because it was profitable. He provided them with basic shelter and food. He was greedy and dismissive, and had no conception of them as people rather than assets. That is the ceiling of his decency, and it's a very low ceiling, but in the context of Tatooine's slave economy, it apparently passed for reasonable. Anakin's days were long. Up early, working in the shop, repairs, fetching parts, running errands across Mos Espa in the heat, while navigating a city that had its dangerous corners. The Hutts controlled most of the criminal activity in the region. Bounty hunters drifted through. There were parts of town that a child on an errand simply did not walk through if he had any sense, and Anakin had a great deal of sense. After work, he'd come home to the hovel and work on his projects. C-3PO was a years-long effort, finding the right components, understanding how they connected, filling in gaps when new salvage came in that fit. It required not just technical skill, but genuine patience, the willingness to work on something indefinitely, with no guarantee it would ever be finished, because the thing you're building seems worth it. He was a child doing this. I find that remarkable every time. The Force sensitivity manifested in ways he didn't have language for. He was just fast in ways that didn't quite make sense, that no amount of practice or instinct entirely explained. In the cockpit, he could process information before it consciously registered, react to things that were still half a second from arriving. He felt things before they occurred. He knew sometimes what someone was going to say before they said it. On Tatooine, there was no framework for understanding what this was. It was just how he was. There's something worth sitting with in the image of him in that garage. Working on his racer, a kid who builds things from nothing and knows exactly how everything works, who has never been anywhere and never been anything except property, who is, unbeknownst to essentially everyone including himself, carrying a connection to the Force so powerful it had never been recorded in Jedi history. Living in a junkyard, belonging to someone else. He was happy, more or less. Not free, not safe, not secure in any practical sense, but children have this capacity for finding the actual texture of their life rather than the version of it that adults look at from outside. And what Anakin had was a mother who loved him completely, a set of skills that made him feel capable, and something that looked, to a 9-year-old, like purpose. He dreamed of becoming a pilot, of travelling the galaxy, of seeing things beyond the twin sunsets of Tatooine, which were beautiful in the way that prisons are sometimes beautiful, genuinely lovely and impossible to leave. He told anyone who would listen that he was going to be a Jedi someday. He said it with the particular clarity that children have about their ambitions before the world has had time to complicate them. The Republic wasn't there for Shmi, she told him once. She meant it as practical information, not bitterness. You can't count on the systems that are supposed to help you. Be capable. Be self-sufficient. Be kind anyway. He listened. For a while. The last thing worth saying about this part of his life is that Shmi made the hovel feel like a home. She kept it clean. She had a few small possessions. She cooked whatever they had and made it enough. She told him stories about the Sun Dragon. She did this across years of captivity, of having no choices about her own life, of raising a child in conditions she couldn't protect him from. And she never let the circumstances become the ceiling of what she gave him. He would spend the rest of his life trying to repay a debt he could never fully name. It all changed the way things change when you're not expecting them to. A ship with a broken hyperdrive, a detour through a junk shop, a stranger who noticed something about him that nobody else had thought to look for. Not dramatically. Just a door opened that had no door before. The arrival of Qui-Gon Jinn on Tatooine is not a planned event. He's not there looking for Anakin. He's there because a diplomatic mission has gone badly sideways, and the ship carrying Queen Padme Amidala of Naboo needs parts for a damaged hyperdrive. And Tatooine happened to be the nearest planet available for an unscheduled landing. The story of Anakin Skywalker begins, essentially, because of a mechanical failure in space. This is worth knowing, because the mythology around Anakin can make it feel like the whole thing was precisely orchestrated, as if the Force was running some elaborate cosmic plan with a specific destination in mind. And perhaps it was, in the sense that Star Wars does take seriously the idea of the Force as something that acts with purpose. But from the outside, what it looks like is a coincidence. Two people completely unconnected by intention, thrown together because a ship broke down and someone needed a hyperdrive generator. Qui-Gon Jinn is an unusual figure within the Jedi Order. He believes deeply in the living Force, the immediate, intuitive aspect of it, the part concerned with sensing what's in front of you right now, rather than what the Jedi Council has determined should happen. He follows instincts that other Jedi would second-guess. He'd been passed over for a seat on the Jedi Council and had a slightly complicated history with his own former master, Count Dooku. He was brilliant, a bit difficult, and exactly the kind of person who would notice something in a junkyard that other Jedi might walk past. He walks into Watto's shop with young Padme, travelling incognito, presenting as a handmaiden, and they meet a 9-year-old who immediately offers to help them. Anakin's instinct, without hesitation, is to help. Shmi taught him that. He sees strangers in difficulty, and his first response is to figure out what he can do. Qui-Gon notices this. He also notices something else, a quality in the way the boy moves, a quickness, something he can't entirely place, but that pulls his attention. The plan that comes together is this. Anakin will race in the Boonta Eve Classic, Mos Esper's annual pod race. If he wins, Qui-Gon gets the hyperdrive parts needed for the ship. Watto, a devoted gambler, bets Anakin's freedom, though not Shmi's, which will matter, against the parts, and the race takes place. Before that, Qui-Gon takes a blood sample from Anakin, quietly, without making a production of it. The test comes back with results he's never seen. Midi-chlorians are microscopic organisms that live in the cells of every living thing. They serve as the connection between the living Force and the cosmic Force, the interface through which Force-sensitive beings perceive and work with the Force. The standard measure of them is used to gauge a person's natural Force potential. Anakin's count came back at over 20,000, higher than any recorded figure in Jedi history, higher than Yoda. Qui-Gon's own count was apparently impressive. Anakin's made it look modest. There's been a great deal of discussion over the years about the midi-chlorian explanation, whether it diminishes the Force by making it measurable, whether it's too clinical, all of that. I've largely made my peace with it. The films are clear that midi-chlorians are the conduit, not the thing itself. The Force is still whatever the Force is. It's just that some beings have, as it were, more efficient plumbing. And in this particular case, the plumbing was unprecedented. Qui-Gon had heard of the Chosen One prophecy, an ancient Jedi prediction about a being who would bring balance to the Force, conceived without a father, possessing extraordinary power. He asked Shmi about Anakin's father. She said, "There is no father. She simply became pregnant." She couldn't explain it. She had carried him and raised him, and loved him, and that was all she knew. Qui-Gon connected the dots. The race itself is worth a moment, because it's one of the better pieces of the prequels as spectacle. The Boonta Eve Classic wound through canyons and caverns and open desert at speeds that made it extremely dangerous for human pilots and merely hazardous for the alien species with better reaction times. Anakin's main competition was a Dug pilot named Sebulba, experienced, dirty, and not above sabotage. He and Anakin had history. Sebulba had caused Anakin to crash before. Anakin's engine misfired on the start. He fell behind almost immediately, which is not an ideal opening when you're racing for your own freedom. He recovered. He navigated the course with the quality that would define his flying throughout his life. Reckless and brilliant and slightly too close to the walls, making decisions in fractions of a second that most pilots would take considerably longer to process. He overtook the field. He caught Sebulba on the final lap. Sebulba tried to crash him. It didn't work. Anakin won. And what's worth noting about that moment is that he seemed genuinely pleased. Not just relieved, not overwhelmed, just happy, in the specific way that someone is happy when they've done something they love and done it well. The circumstances of the race didn't diminish the pleasure of the racing. He would carry that quality of finding real joy in doing things excellently all the way through to the end. Now came the goodbye. Anakin had won his freedom. He could go with Qui-Gon. He wanted to go. This was the thing he'd been waiting for. The pilot's life, the Jedi, the galaxy beyond Tatooine. But Shmi wasn't part of the bet, and Watto wouldn't give up 2 slaves, and Qui-Gon couldn't arrange otherwise. She was staying. He didn't want to go without her. He said he didn't want to leave her. She held him. She said this was why she'd raised him the way she had, so he would be ready for the moment it came. He said he didn't want to be the Sun Dragon if being the Sun Dragon meant leaving her. She told him the Sun Dragon is brave enough to leave the star and still carry it inside him. Then she told him, "You are my only hope," which is a phrase the Star Wars universe will use again, in a different context with entirely different weight, some decades later. She was saying it the way a mother says something when she means it with her whole self. He walked away crying. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. This is the wound at the centre of the story. Not any particular act of villainy. Not any specific choice made later. This. A 9-year-old told he was special enough to take, but not special enough to take his family with him. Every dark decision that follows, every expression of the fear of losing people, every terrible act committed in the name of preventing loss, traces a route back to this moment. The Jedi got Anakin. They didn't get the thing that made him Anakin. They flew to Coruscant, a planet that is, in its entirety, just one enormous city. Towers and spires stretching as far as you can see in every direction. Nothing but urban density, from surface to stratosphere. Anakin, who had spent his entire life on a desert planet and had never seen rain, stood and looked at it. I imagine he didn't quite know what to feel. Or, probably, grief still. The particular vertigo of a world that has rearranged itself faster than you were prepared for. He was 9 years old, alone except for a Jedi he'd met 3 days ago, on his way to meet a council he'd only heard about, already further from home than he had ever imagined being. He was also, without knowing it, the most Force-sensitive being the Jedi Order had ever encountered, arriving at their doorstep in a borrowed set of clothes. The galaxy has a sense of occasion, even when it doesn't show it. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant is an enormous building, old in the way that institutions are old when they've been standing long enough that everyone has stopped asking what they were like when they were young. 4 tall spires, a central tower visible from most of the planet's skyline. Inside, thousands of Jedi, or there were at the height of the Order, training halls and archives and meditation rooms. An entire world unto itself, with its own rhythms and its own particular kind of silence. Anakin arrived here as a 9-year-old in borrowed clothes, having never heard of most of it, and was put in front of the council for assessment. The assessment began the way these things do. Tests. Qui-Gon had already run the blood test. The council ran others. They showed Anakin a screen with images on it and asked him to identify through the Force what he was seeing rather than looking at the screen directly. He got all of them. Then Mace Windu, one of the senior council members, a man whose particular quality of authority fills a room without effort, asked Anakin what he was feeling. Anakin said he missed his mother. I don't know if this answer was what made the council hesitant, specifically, but it couldn't have helped. Yoda was the most direct about the reservation. He said he sensed much fear in the boy, fear of losing his mother, fear of loss in general. He said that fear is the path to the dark side, which is the kind of thing Yoda says that sounds profound and is also, in retrospect, completely correct in its diagnosis and entirely useless as a prescription. Identifying someone's vulnerability is not the same as addressing it. Telling a grieving child that his grief is dangerous is not a treatment plan. The council voted not to train him. Too old. Their initiates came to the temple as infants or very young children, raised within its walls from the start, without the accumulated attachments that older children brought with them. Anakin was 9, and he had a mother he loved, and a world he'd come from, and a whole previous life that existed outside anything the Order had shaped. From the Council's perspective, that was a risk, a specific, known risk that the Order had developed its intake procedures precisely to avoid. I want to be fair to them here, because the story is often not. Their hesitation wasn't unreasonable. The pattern they'd identified, attachment leading to possessiveness, possessiveness leading to fear of loss leading to the dark side, was a real pattern observed across centuries. They weren't wrong to see it in Anakin. What they were, I think, is inflexible, unable to imagine a response other than refusal, when what the situation called for might have been something more inventive and human. Qui-Gon disagreed with the decision. He announced he would train Anakin himself, council preference notwithstanding. This is very Qui-Gon. The council was not pleased. This is also very Qui-Gon. Before any of this could be properly resolved, the political situation that had brought everyone to Coruscant in the first place escalated. Queen Amidala returned to Naboo to lead her people. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan went with her. Anakin went with them because there wasn't a better option, which is perhaps not ideal planning for what became a fairly significant battle. On Naboo, during the effort to retake the capital, Anakin ended up inside a starfighter that he'd been hiding in for safety. He hit some buttons trying to defend himself from approaching battle droids, and the thing launched. And then, through a combination of instincts and extraordinary luck, and the Force doing what the Force does, he flew into the Trade Federation's droid control ship, knocked out the reactor, and deactivated the entire droid army. The battle ended, so did the war. The Council gave him credit, reluctantly, and then Qui-Gon died. Darth Maul, a Sith Lord who had been working in the shadows throughout the film, apprenticed to a figure called Darth Sidious, who at this point in the story we only see in hologram, caught them in Naboo's power generator complex. He fought Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan simultaneously, and he was extraordinary. Fast, aggressive, wielding a double-bladed lightsaber with a fluency that made him something neither of them had encountered before. He killed Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan, separated by an energy barrier, watched his master die. When the barrier dropped, he fought Maul, and he was losing, genuinely, nearly fatally losing, and then he found something. The Force, or the will to survive, or the refusal to fail, at the one thing that still mattered. He launched himself from the edge of a pit, caught Qui-Gon's lightsaber on the way up, and cut Maul in half. Qui-Gon's last words to Obi-Wan, "Train the boy," he asked him to promise. Obi-Wan promised. The Jedi Council, following the battle and following Qui-Gon's death, reconsidered. Anakin would be trained. Not because they'd changed their minds about the theoretical risks, Yoda remained uneasy, and said so clearly, but because Qui-Gon had asked and Obi-Wan had promised, and refusing now felt more fraught than accepting. And so, Obi-Wan Kenobi became Anakin Skywalker's master. Not by election, not because the Council thought it was ideal, but because the man who'd raised Obi-Wan was gone, and the only thing left of him was a promise. There's a detail worth noting. In the years that followed, Palpatine, who had, during the Naboo crisis, been elected Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, which was not accidental, because nothing Palpatine did was ever accidental, told a young Anakin that he would watch his career with great interest. It's a throwaway line in the film. It is not a throwaway in the story. Palpatine had seen Anakin immediately for what he was, and had begun, in that single sentence, laying the groundwork for something he would spend the next 15 years building. The 10 years between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones are largely off-screen. What we know, Anakin trained, went on missions, developed the dynamic with Obi-Wan, that would make them one of the most effective Jedi pairings of their generation. He was gifted and occasionally impossible, and loved Obi-Wan in the way that you love someone you didn't choose but couldn't imagine being without. He also never stopped thinking about his mother. Worth holding on to before we move on. Anakin was 9 when the Order accepted him, not an infant, and that difference is one the story never stops paying interest on. There is a very different story available here. A Jedi Order with different institutional culture, one that could have said, this person comes to us with grief and attachment and fear already formed, and our job is to help him work with those things rather than suppress them. That story doesn't end the same way. The Order that exists in the prequels can't imagine that story, which is its own kind of tragedy. A brief observation about how this all began before we move on. 2 people at Qui-Gon's funeral, filmed in the Naboo Palace gardens, both wearing black, neither quite sure what they owe each other. Already inseparable in the way that shared grief makes people inseparable before they've decided what they are. That image stays with me. It's where the friendship that will define the rest of the story begins, in mourning, without ceremony, simply because there was no one else. 10 years pass, Anakin is 19. He's tall now and looks like the kind of person who belongs in a war, which is unfortunate because that's also exactly what's approaching. He's been Obi-Wan's Padawan for all of that time, and the relationship has become something that neither of them entirely has words for, but that both of them clearly value enormously. Obi-Wan's approach as a master was specific, and probably not always comfortable for someone with Anakin's temperament. He was methodical, careful, attentive to the protocols of the Order in ways that came from genuine belief rather than mere compliance. He'd grown up in the temple, had the teachings so thoroughly absorbed that they were more instinct than philosophy. He believed in the rules not as constraints but as wisdom, accumulated understanding from centuries of Jedi who'd learned what happened when you didn't follow them. He was also, underneath the reserve, quite fond of Anakin. He just occasionally tried to keep it professional, and fairly often failed. Anakin's assessment of Obi-Wan, as delivered to Padme in Attack of the Clones. He's a great Jedi. He's wise as Master Yoda and as powerful as Master Windu. I'm not sure I've lived up to his expectations. And then, a beat later, it's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back. He says both of these things with complete sincerity. He was 19. The mission that brings them back into Padme's orbit is, on the surface, straightforward. Senator Padme Amidala, who has served her term as Queen of Naboo and now represents the planet in the Galactic Senate, has received death threats following her opposition to a military bill. There's been an assassination attempt. Anakin and Obi-Wan are assigned to guard her. Obi-Wan follows the lead on the assassin. Anakin is sent to escort Padme back to Naboo, where she'll be safer. The decision to send a 19-year-old who had been visibly in love with a specific woman since he was 9 years old to spend several weeks alone with her on a pastoral planet is, in retrospect, extraordinary. Not malicious, just genuinely not thought through. The Jedi Council had a lot on their minds. Naboo, as a planet, is almost aggressively beautiful. Green hills, lakes, waterfalls, warm light, architecture that manages to be grand without feeling cold. If Tatooine is the least pleasant planet in the galaxy, Naboo is somewhere near the most pleasant, and Anakin, who had grown up in a junkyard, arrived there and spent several days in meadows, riding large, gentle creatures called shaks, watching sunsets, and talking to Padme for hours about everything. He was earnest to a degree that was either charming or slightly overwhelming, depending on the angle. He said what he felt directly, without deflection. He told her things that the Jedi Code had not equipped him to say in careful, diplomatically appropriate ways, because he'd never learned to be diplomatic about things that mattered. Some of it landed beautifully, some of it very much did not. There is a line he delivers about sand, about how sand is coarse and rough and irritating and gets everywhere, unlike her, that has become perhaps the most mocked dialogue in the entire prequel trilogy. Passion was clearly present. Craft, that particular day, somewhat less so. Padmé resisted, not easily. She was thoughtful about what it would mean. The Jedi Code, the political complications of a senator and a Jedi, the specific madness of acting on this at all. But she was also not unaffected. She'd known him since he was a child, had watched him become something extraordinary, and he attended to her with a quality of presence that is difficult to be genuinely immune to. Then the dreams began. Anakin started having nightmares about his mother. Not vague unease, specific, vivid, recurring nightmares about her suffering somewhere, in pain, reaching for him. They grew worse across the nights on Naboo. He'd had this kind of dream before, he told Padmé quietly, and the last time he'd been right about it. He was right this time too. They went to Tatooine, to the Lars moisture farm on the edge of the desert, where Anakin discovered that Shmi had been freed from Watto and married a man named Cliegg Lars, who had bought her freedom and then married her. She had a stepson named Owen, and a small home, and something approaching ordinary life. This is genuinely lovely. I'd like to leave it there. The story doesn't. Tusken Raiders had been raiding farms in the region. Shmi had been taken a month earlier. Cliegg had led a rescue party. Most of them had been killed, including Cliegg losing his own leg. The trail had gone cold. Anakin rode out into the desert alone, at night, on a borrowed speeder. He found the Tusken camp. He found his mother in one of the tents, alive barely. She'd been there for weeks, through things I won't describe in detail. She was barely conscious when he arrived. But she came around enough to open her eyes and see him. She said his name. She said she was complete now. She told him she loved him. And then she died in his arms. He sat there for a moment. Then he walked out of the tent and killed everyone in the camp. The men, the women, the children. He came back to the Lars homestead and told Padmé what he'd done. I killed them all, he said, and I'm not sorry. And then, I know I was wrong and I shouldn't have done it, but I can't help it. There is a great deal written about this moment and what it represents. And it is terrible, genuinely terrible. The murder of people who couldn't defend themselves against what he was. I don't want to soften that, but the line I keep returning to is that one. I know I was wrong. He wasn't deluded about it. He wasn't rationalizing it into something acceptable. He was in the middle of something he couldn't stop, and he was telling someone the honest truth about it. That quality of knowing what's wrong while doing it, of the self-awareness being present and insufficient, will stay with him. It becomes, in fact, the specific shape of his tragedy. Not ignorance, not corruption into someone who doesn't know better. Just a fear large enough to override judgment, over and over, until the pattern becomes permanent. Padmé didn't leave. They buried Shmi at the Lars farm. They married on Naboo shortly after. A quiet ceremony, just the two of them and the droids, no witnesses beyond R2-D2 and C-3PO, no announcement, no acknowledgement to anyone that it had happened. A secret marriage between a Jedi who wasn't supposed to form attachments and a senator whose political position made the whole thing deeply complicated. It wasn't triumphant. It barely even felt happy exactly. It felt like two people deciding that whatever was coming, they were going to face it together. Which is, depending on how you look at it, either the most romantic thing in the story or the saddest, or both simultaneously. The galaxy at that point was about to give them quite a lot to face together. The Clone Wars were beginning. The fight at Geonosis, which we'll get to properly in the next section, had already happened. Anakin had already lost his right arm in a fight he should never have picked. Everything was accelerating. The quiet of Naboo's meadows already felt very far away. The Clone Wars were a galaxy-wide conflict lasting roughly 3 years, from about 22 to 19 BBY. They were named for the army that fought them, soldiers grown from the genetic template of a bounty hunter named Jango Fett. Commissioned in secret a decade earlier, deployed in their hundreds of thousands when the separatist movement launched its first military action against the Republic on a planet called Geonosis. It was the largest armed conflict the galaxy had seen in over a millennium, and it began before most people had any idea it was coming. There's a layer of politics underneath all of this that I won't spend too much time on tonight. The short version: a faction of worlds had been organising under Count Dooku, former Jedi Master, now Sith, public face of a movement whose actual architecture had been designed entirely by Palpatine. The war was engineered from the beginning, weaken both sides, increase the Chancellor's emergency powers, create the conditions for a transition that would be complete before anyone understood what they'd agreed to. The Jedi walked into it without quite realizing they were being used. Anakin was knighted as a Jedi Knight shortly after Geonosis, where, among other things, he'd lost his right arm in a confrontation with Count Dooku that he absolutely should not have picked but could not resist picking. Dooku was a Sith Lord. Anakin was a Padawan. The result was predictable and painful, and also, arguably, characteristic. He couldn't help himself. He knew the odds and went anyway. The arm was replaced with a mechanical prosthetic, the second piece of him that becomes machine. He was then given a Padawan, which he hadn't asked for, and wasn't entirely sure he wanted. Ahsoka Tano was 14 when she was assigned to Anakin. She was enthusiastic and occasionally reckless and quick-tempered and very, very good. She called him Sky Guy, which he hated. He called her Snips in retaliation, which she pretended to hate, but clearly didn't entirely mind. She was, in a great many ways, a younger version of him. The same energy and instinct and talent, just slightly less experienced and without the accumulated weight he'd already been carrying for a while. Anakin was not, initially, a willing teacher. He'd barely adjusted to being a Jedi Knight. Having a student meant being responsible for someone else's safety, which he found considerably more frightening than his own. He'd watched his mother carry responsibility alone and was not inclined to be careless with what he was given. What he gave Ahsoka, though, was something the standard Jedi curriculum couldn't quite provide: permission to be herself. He trained her to be creative, to trust her instincts, to break rules when following them was going to get people killed. He also, notably, cared about the clone troopers under his command in ways that other Jedi commanders sometimes didn't. He knew their names, he made jokes with them, he treated them as people rather than assets, and they followed him with a loyalty that went beyond their program directives. On the battlefield, he was extraordinary. The holonet called him the hero with no fear, which wasn't entirely accurate. He had fears, significant ones, but captured something true about how he operated in a fight. Aggressive and innovative, constantly forward, operating at a tempo that most opponents couldn't match. His style was pressure, constant movement, forcing the pace, never giving anyone time to think. He had that forced sense of what was about to happen, and in combat, it made him genuinely terrifying. There are too many Clone Wars campaigns to list in full tonight, but a few are worth knowing about. The Mortis arc. This is one of the stranger and more important pieces of the Star Wars mythology from the Clone Wars animated series. Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka follow a signal to a realm outside normal space called Mortis, where they encounter three ancient force-wielding beings, the Father, the Son, and the Daughter, who embody something like the balance of the Force itself. The Son, representing the dark side, offers to show Anakin his future. Anakin tries to resist. He can't. He sees himself in the black armor. He sees himself killing Jedi, force-choking Padme, standing at the Emperor's side, fighting Obi-Wan. He sees everything. He falls to his knees, overwhelmed by what the vision shows him, and the Son says, "Now you know. Join me and we can change it." The Father eventually removes the vision from Anakin's memory as an act of mercy. But for a brief window, Anakin Skywalker saw exactly what he was going to become and was horrified by it. The memory was taken. I don't think those things ever fully disappear. What the Clone Wars did to Anakin psychologically is something the series explores more honestly than the films had room for. He was a soldier's soldier, loyal to his people, genuine in his care for them, deriving real satisfaction from the specific craft of what he was good at. But he was also increasingly uncomfortable with what the war was doing to the Republic and to the Order both. The Jedi had become military commanders, which wasn't what they were supposed to be. The Senate had been handing Palpatine emergency powers incrementally across the whole conflict, each extension seeming necessary and temporary in isolation. He had episodes of real darkness during the war. There are moments in the series where he reaches for a severity that crosses lines, decisions made in the name of necessity that the Jedi Code would have prohibited, interrogation methods that went further than they should have. Each time he stepped back from the edge, each time the step back was slightly harder, and then there was Ahsoka's departure, which was its own particular wound. She was framed for the bombing of the Jedi Temple. The Council, rather than standing firmly behind her while the investigation continued, expelled her from the Order in response to political pressure. Anakin fought for her. He cleared her name, found the real culprit, brought the truth back to the Council. But by the time he did, the damage was done. The Order had shown her exactly what its loyalty was worth when things became complicated. They offered her a reinstatement. She said no. She walked away from the Jedi. He watched her go. This mattered to him more than the films had time to show. He'd taken her to the Council when she needed protection, and they had failed her. His belief in the institution, already complicated at the edges from years of feeling watched and mistrusted, took a crack that didn't fully close. He couldn't talk to Padme about it, not in the way it needed. He couldn't fully discuss it with Obi-Wan without it reading as criticism of the Order that Obi-Wan embodied. He processed it in the way he processed most things, alone, imperfectly, with the result that it stayed somewhere unresolved. The quality of the Clone Wars series, particularly the later seasons, that I find remarkable is its willingness to show what sustained conflict does to people. It doesn't let the war be abstract. Clone troopers die, named ones the show has taken episodes to make you care about. Anakin is shown gradually, moving further from the Jedi he was supposed to be, and closer to the person the Mortis vision showed him. Not dramatically, just a slow accumulation of choices made under pressure, each one slightly further from where he'd started. By the time we reach Revenge of the Sith, Anakin has been fighting a war for 3 years. He's lost his Padawan. He's lost pieces of himself he's not entirely sure he can name. He's in love with a woman he can't acknowledge and afraid of losing her and carrying all of it alone. And Palpatine has been listening consistently to everything he couldn't say to anyone else. There's a quality to the Clone Wars series, particularly the final 2 seasons that I think earns it more credit than it sometimes gets as a Saturday morning cartoon. The war is allowed to be genuinely expensive. People die, including named people the show has taken episodes to make you care about. The moral complexity of a galaxy-wide conflict is taken seriously rather than glossed over. And the show does something the films didn't have room for, which is to show Anakin over time. Not in the dramatic highs of specific moments, but in the accumulated texture of years. Rex in particular. Rex was a clone captain who had served under Anakin since Geonosis, who knew him better in some ways than Obi-Wan did, because they operated in the field together rather than in the formal hierarchies of the Order. Their relationship was built on genuine mutual regard. Rex called him General because the rank required it, but the way he said it contained everything that the rank didn't. He was the closest thing Anakin had to a peer during the war years, someone who understood the specific reality of what they were doing rather than the political or spiritual framing of it. The Siege of Mandalore, which takes place simultaneously with the events of Revenge of the Sith, while Order 66 was being executed, while Anakin was in the Chancellor's office making the choice that changed everything. Ahsoka was on Mandalore with Rex, fighting Maul. She was back in the orbit of the war because the situation required it. She nearly died, and when the order came through, the clone she'd been fighting alongside since she was 14 turned on her. Rex had asked Ahsoka to find and remove his inhibitor chip before the operation started. He'd had his removed. He was the only trooper who survived with her. The specific detail that Anakin's two closest non-Jedi relationships, Ahsoka and Rex, were elsewhere, when everything fell apart, is something the story never quite makes explicit, but which feels meaningful when you notice it. The people who might have been in the room when he needed someone, who understood him in the specific way that shared experience creates understanding, were on the other side of the galaxy. Not by accident, Palpatine had arranged the rescue mission that took Obi-Wan to Utapau, had orchestrated the Mandalore situation through Maul, had managed the chessboard so that Anakin was alone in the final days. The Clone Wars asks a question the films don't quite have room for. What was this war actually doing to the people fighting it? Not in terms of ideology or politics, but in terms of the specific psychic cost of 3 years of sustained combat. For Anakin, who went in already carrying more than most people could hold, the answer is, it made the fear bigger and gave it more material to work with, and didn't offer anything that could address it. The war was almost over. None of it had been worth what it cost. There is a scene in Revenge of the Sith where Palpatine and Anakin attend the opera together. Coruscant opera, apparently, involves holographic performers suspended in a sphere of energy while music fills a darkened theatre. It's elegant and unusual and slightly unsettling, which is very appropriate for what the scene is actually about. Palpatine tells Anakin the legend of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Plagueis was a Sith Lord, he says, who became so powerful that he could influence the midi-chlorians to create life, who had learned the secret of keeping the people he cared about from dying, who could stop others from dying, but not himself, because his own apprentice killed him in his sleep once he'd learned everything he needed to know, which is, as Palpatine delivers it, simultaneously a cautionary tale and a very specific advertisement. Anakin asks whether it's possible to learn this power. Palpatine looks at him and says, very quietly, "Not from a Jedi. I've thought about this scene a great deal. The theatre is dark. The performers are doing something beautiful in their sphere, and Palpatine is sitting there, calmly, telling a man who is terrified of losing his wife about a technique that might let him save her. He had been building to this conversation for 15 years. He knew exactly what he was doing. By this point in the story, Anakin was having dreams about Padme. Not vague unease or general anxiety, specific, recurring, vivid nightmares about her dying in childbirth. He'd had this type of dream before, about his mother, and had been right. He knew what these dreams meant. He consulted Yoda about it. Yoda told him to release his attachment and accept the loss. He told no one else. He was carrying this alone, as he carried most things, and Palpatine was the only person who had ever actually engaged with it, rather than either dismissing it or offering philosophical guidance about how to feel less. The relationship between them across the preceding decade had the texture of friendship and the function of a trap. Palpatine listened. He validated Anakin's frustrations with the Jedi Council, which were legitimate frustrations genuinely, rather than encouraging him to address them through the Order's channels. He offered perspective that was always slightly tilted. The Jedi were withholding from Anakin. He deserved more trust than he was being given. The rules were designed by people who didn't fully understand what Anakin was. None of this was false exactly. The Council had never fully trusted Anakin. They had kept him at arm's length even while relying on him. When Revenge of the Sith begins, they send him to spy on Palpatine, but refuse to grant him the rank of Master, a decision that was perhaps technically defensible and was practically insulting, and Anakin felt both of those things simultaneously. Palpatine was excellent at finding the true parts of a grievance and emphasizing them until the true part became the whole picture. There's also the specific language Palpatine used with him. He called Anakin something very close to a son, in everything but the explicit word. He spoke of watching him grow, of caring for his development, of being proud. He was warm in the particular way that people are warm when they have worked very hard at it. And Anakin, who had lost his actual father before he was born, who had left his mother at 9 years old, who had a master he loved but who remained his master, found that language landing somewhere. He wasn't naive about it. He was 22 years old and not unintelligent. He knew at some level that Palpatine was not simply a kind old man who happened to like him, but he also wanted very much to believe that the affection was real. Because the alternative, that the one person who had consistently affirmed him across his entire career had been running a calculation the whole time, was too bleak to fully entertain. So he half knew and didn't pursue the knowing. This is a completely comprehensible psychological position. It's not stupidity. It's the specific way that people manage information they can't bear to have confirmed. The situation in the final weeks before Revenge of the Sith is this. Anakin is placed on the Jedi Council as Palpatine's personal representative, a liaison between the Chancellor and the Order. The Council wants him to spy on Palpatine. Palpatine wants information about the Council's activities. Anakin is sitting in the middle, loyal to both and trusted by neither, being asked to betray someone in every direction he turns. He was also increasingly convinced that the Council had its own agenda, that they were using him instrumentally, that the democracy they were supposed to be protecting was already dying around them, and nobody was saying it clearly enough. And then Padme told him she was pregnant. This should have been a joy. It was partly, but it was also another vector for the fear, another person he couldn't protect with the tools he had, another target for whatever the universe was going to do to the people he loved. He'd seen how the universe treated the people he loved. He'd held his mother while she died. The dreams were getting worse. Palpatine at the opera said, "There is a power that can stop the people you love from dying." And he said it with the particular patience of someone who has been waiting a very long time to deliver a specific line. The timing is everything when you think about it. 15 years of groundwork, and then the offering of the one thing at the exact moment the fear was largest. The opera house and its sphere of beautiful floating light. A man who has spent 15 years becoming someone's father figure, telling that person there is a door, and he knows where the door is, and the only price is everything. That is the shape of the trap. It didn't close immediately. It was designed to be recognized as a trap, and chosen anyway, because by the time it became recognizable, there would be no other option that felt survivable. One more thing about this section of the story, and then we'll get to what happens next. Anakin went into the Clone Wars as someone with a specific, understood vulnerability, the fear of loss that Yoda had named when he was 9 years old, standing in the council chamber, saying he missed his mother. The whole intervening decade plus had done nothing to address that. The Jedi Code had asked him to suppress it. The war had given it a great deal of material to work with. And now Palpatine had found it and was offering him a key. The key was real, in a sense. The power Palpatine described did exist in the tradition of the dark side. What was false was the framing, that it could be used to save someone, that the knowledge would be given freely, that the price would be anything other than everything Anakin had ever been. One thing that gets slightly overlooked in discussions of this period is how isolated Anakin actually was in the final months. Obi-Wan was away on the Outer Rim campaign for most of it, chasing Grievous, managing the military situation, operating at the edge of Republic space. He and Anakin communicated, but not in the way they would have if they'd been together. The specific relationship, the thing that, for all its complications, had given Anakin a reference point, someone who would tell him the truth, was conducting itself at a distance, and Padme was in the Senate, navigating politics that were rapidly becoming impossible to navigate, watching the democratic institutions she'd given her career to defend being dismantled from the inside. She and Anakin kept their marriage secret, and their fear secret, and their entire relationship secret. The secrecy that had seemed manageable at the beginning had accumulated across 3 years into something heavier. They loved each other. They processed almost nothing together, two people carrying the same enormous weight in separate rooms. The council meeting where Anakin is placed on the council, but denied master rank, is instructive. He sits in the chair. He's present physically, and everyone in that room knows something is wrong, and nobody says it directly. Mace Windu looks at him with distrust. Yoda observes carefully. They want his intelligence about Palpatine. They don't want to give him anything in return. The meeting produces exactly the kind of institutional awkwardness that confirms every suspicion Palpatine has spent 15 years cultivating. The Jedi don't fully trust you. They are using you. Your loyalty to them is not reciprocated in kind. He said nothing. He held it. He went home to Padme and held that too. Anakin Skywalker, in the final weeks before everything ended, was carrying the secret marriage, the pregnancy, the dreams, the fear, the distrust of the council, the distrust of Palpatine that he couldn't quite commit to, the loss of Ahsoka, the weight of 3 years of a war that had taken pieces of him he hadn't fully accounted for yet. He was 22 years old. He'd been doing this essentially alone for his entire life, because the one thing the Jedi Order had never taught him was how to share a burden. Put it down. Release your attachment. That's not the same thing. But he was afraid, and fear had always been the thing that made him do what he couldn't undo. What happens in Revenge of the Sith happens very quickly. That's one of the things that makes it difficult to sit with. It takes roughly 3 days of in-universe time, this particular end of the world. The Jedi Order has been standing for 1,000 years. It ends in an afternoon. Anakin realizes, in the days after the rescue of Palpatine from General Grievous, the opening sequence of the film, that the Chancellor is a Sith Lord. Not from careful investigation. Palpatine more or less tells him, having calculated that the moment has arrived. He reveals his true identity to Anakin directly, because he needs Anakin to make a choice, and the choice has to be made with full knowledge of what's being offered. Anakin does the right thing. He goes to Mace Windu and reports what he's learned. He tells the most senior Jedi Council member he can reach that Chancellor Palpatine is Darth Sidious. He does this knowing what it means, knowing the consequences. He does the right thing. Mace takes a team to arrest Palpatine. He tells Anakin to wait. Don't come. We'll handle this. Anakin sits in the council chamber and looks out at the Coruscant skyline. Then he goes anyway. What he finds? Palpatine on the floor, apparently defeated and helpless, looking diminished and frail in a way Anakin has never seen him look. Mace Windu standing over him with a lightsaber, apparently about to execute him. Palpatine screaming that the Jedi are traitors, that this is unlawful, that he can't defend himself. Here is the question the film deliberately leaves ambiguous. Was Palpatine actually defeated, or was he performing? The evidence strongly suggests the latter. We know he is extraordinarily capable, the most powerful Sith Lord in centuries, capable of hiding his Force presence from the entire Council. For decades, the frail, helpless old man is almost certainly a performance, designed precisely to create this moment. But Anakin can't be certain, and he arrives at the exact moment of maximum moral ambiguity, when Mace Windu looks from one angle exactly like a Jedi executing a defenseless prisoner. Anakin says, "This is not the Jedi way." He means it genuinely. He does believe it. He also has a very specific self-interested reason to want Palpatine alive. The knowledge, the power over death that Palpatine described at the opera. That knowledge dies with Palpatine if Mace kills him here. He ignites his lightsaber and cuts off Mace Windu's hand. Palpatine immediately sends Mace out the window with Force lightning. In the silence that follows, Anakin kneels on the floor. He says, "What have I done?" He knows. Then he says, "I can't turn back." And that is the line I always return to. Not, "I won't turn back. I can't." As if he's already on a side of a door that has closed behind him, and the will to reverse it is no longer operative. Palpatine names him Darth Vader in the same breath. The efficiency of it is striking. The man has just committed the act that forecloses every other path, and his reward is immediate. Here is who you are now. The name is a cage dressed up as an identity, offered without pause. And then Anakin goes to the Jedi Temple and leads a battalion of clone troopers through it. I won't describe this in detail. It is the darkest thing in the whole saga, not the most spectacular, not the most dramatic in terms of set pieces, just the darkest. The place where Anakin grew up, the archives where he had studied, the training rooms, the children who were learning, who hadn't understood yet that something was wrong. Very few survived. Yoda survived. Obi-Wan survived. Just barely, elsewhere. Almost no one else of significance made it. Order 66 was executing simultaneously across the galaxy. The inhibitor chips in the clone troopers' brains, devices Palpatine had built into the program from the very beginning, years before the war started, activated in response to the signal. Clone soldiers turned on the Jedi generals they'd been fighting alongside for 3 years. Generals who knew their names, who trusted them. The betrayal was built in from the start, dormant, waiting. It was over in hours. Vader, Anakin, now Vader, the name having done its work, was sent to Mustafar to execute the separatist leaders. The other half of the war, the faction that had been fighting the Republic, was now also expendable. They were waiting in a facility on the volcanic planet for the war's negotiated conclusion. He walked in and killed them all. The war ended because everyone on both sides who could have continued it was dead or in hiding. Obi-Wan had seen the temple security recordings. He had watched, reluctantly, at Yoda's insistence, because he needed to know what he was about to face. What Anakin had done. He was by any visible measure devastated. He'd raised this person. He'd called him his brother. He'd watched him become something extraordinary over a decade. And now he was looking at footage of that person in the temple corridors. He found Padme, who was preparing to travel to Mustafar. He stowed away on her ship without her knowledge. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. He let her go first. A detail from Hayden Christensen, who played Anakin through all of this. He described the psychological state of those days as someone who has stepped through a door that has closed behind them and is still processing which side of it they're on. The action is done. The consequences haven't fully arrived. There's a strange dissociated quality to that space. It's visible in the performance if you look for it. Everything that follows in the story is the consequence of 3 days. 3 days in which the Republic ended, the Jedi were destroyed, and the man who had been Anakin Skywalker became someone else entirely. He had done it for love. That's the specific cruelty of it. He had done it for love, and the love was already gone, and he didn't know that yet. The Order 66 executions across the galaxy happened in places that the Clone Wars series has since given specific faces and names. Ki Adi Mundi on Maigito, surrounded by clones in a firefight, the soldiers he'd been leading turned their weapons. Isla Secura on Felucia in a jungle clearing. Plo Koon above a planet's atmosphere, his starfighter shot down by his own wing. Each of them trusted the soldiers beside them, completely and reasonably, right up until the moment the instruction arrived that they couldn't disobey. What strikes me most about Order 66, having spent time with the Clone Wars series, is how completely it was built in. The clones didn't choose this. They were programmed for it from birth. The inhibitor chips installed during the cloning process, dormant for years, impossible to detect without knowing to look for them. They were victims of the same trap Anakin was, just with less agency in how it sprang. Rex, the captain who survived by having his chip removed, spent years afterward carrying the weight of what his brothers had been made to do. Yoda felt it all happening through the Force, simultaneously, as he was in the middle of his own battle on Kashyyyk, the sudden extinguishing of thousands of Jedi minds at once. He described the sensation as a great disturbance, something like a cry that was immediately silenced. He sat with that for a moment. Then he did what he always did, which was stand up and deal with what needed dealing with. The Senate session, where Palpatine declared the Empire, is one of the sequences in the film that I find most disturbing, and not because of anything violent. Palpatine stands before hundreds of senators and tells them, carefully, with the cadence of someone who has rehearsed the precise weight of every word, that the Jedi have committed treason, that the Republic is being reorganized to ensure security and justice, that it will be called the Galactic Empire. The camera finds Padme watching from the gallery. Then it finds the Senate applauding. Then it finds her face again. She says, "So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause." She means it as horror, and it is horror. It's also accurate. The Empire wasn't imposed by conquest. It was applauded into existence by a legislature that had been gradually giving away its own power for years, in small increments, each one seeming justified by the immediate crisis. The erosion of the Republic happened slowly, and then all at once, and the people inside it mostly didn't notice until the announcement was made. That Anakin was part of making this happen, that his specific choices were the mechanism by which Palpatine was finally able to act openly, is the particular weight of the fall. Not just that he did terrible things to specific people, but that the entire structure of galactic democracy collapsed partly because of what he chose in a chancellor's office on a Tuesday afternoon. George Lucas compared Anakin's fall to the Faust story, the pact with the devil for something desired desperately, the fiery volcano planet standing in for hell. That's accurate as far as it goes. What I'd add is this. Faust wanted knowledge and power. Anakin wanted to stop being afraid of losing someone. These are different shapes of want. One of them is easier to sympathize with, which is precisely why it's more effective as a tragedy. Mustafar is a volcanic planet, covered in lava flows and black rock, an atmosphere thick with ash and heat that makes it hostile to human survival in almost every direction. The facility where the Separatist Council had been waiting looked functional and unremarkable from inside, with environmental shielding and climate control making it bearable. Outside was fire and stone, and the particular bleakness of a place that has never been anything but harsh. Vader came here to do what he'd been sent to do. He could have handled things differently, brought the Separatist leaders elsewhere, conducted the executions at a distance. He didn't. He went to the most hostile environment available and waited for what came next. Padme came. She'd heard what was happening, from Obi-Wan partly, who had told her enough to understand the scale of what had changed. She went to Mustafar because she still believed, somewhere beneath the evidence, that something could be salvaged. She wasn't wrong about that in the long run. She was wrong about the timing, and the wrong about the timing was fatal. The conversation they have on the landing platform is one of the hardest scenes in the trilogy to sit with, and not for the reasons the action sequences are hard. Padme begs him to leave, to run, to just go somewhere together, the two of them, the children she still hadn't told him were twins, and let the galaxy sort itself out without them. She had names for the children already. She had a plan for a quiet life somewhere. Anakin doesn't want to run. He has a different idea. He says he can overthrow Palpatine, that they can rule the galaxy together, that he has new power now, that things are going to be different. He says this with the specific desperation of someone trying to reframe what he's done into something that can still have a good ending. If he controls everything, nothing can take anyone from him. The logic is broken, but you can see the fear underneath it perfectly clearly. She tells him she doesn't know who he is anymore, that this isn't who she fell in love with. And then Obi-Wan appears at the top of the ship's ramp. What Anakin's mind does in that moment is catastrophic. He decides instantly that Padme brought Obi-Wan there to kill him, that she betrayed him, He force chokes her. She hadn't. Obi-Wan had stowed away without her knowledge. She didn't know he was on the ship. But the fear did what the fear always did. It converted the thing he loved into something threatening, before he'd thought it through, before there was time to think it through. By the time Obi-Wan persuades him to stop, she's unconscious, on the landing platform, and whatever conversation might have changed something is over. The fight between Obi-Wan and Anakin on Mustafar lasted a long time. They trained together for a decade. They knew each other's styles completely, could anticipate each other's movements, had no tactical surprises left to offer. The duel moved through the facility, onto gantries above the lava, onto a platform, on the flow, and it was matched in a way that showed exactly what Anakin was, fighting his own master and holding his own for a very long time. But Obi-Wan spent most of it talking. That's the thing I keep noticing. He kept trying to reach Anakin verbally, even as they fought. You have allowed this Dark Lord to twist your mind. Your allegiance is to the Republic. He didn't come to Mustafar intending to kill him. He came hoping that something could still be recovered, because he couldn't bring himself to stop hoping that until there was no option left. Eventually, Obi-Wan positioned himself on the high bank of a lava channel, above Anakin on a floating platform. He said, "It's over. I have the high ground. Don't try it. There's a reason this specific line works as more than tactical observation." Anakin had become something like obsessed across his career, with the moment Obi-Wan had defeated Darth Maul, the leap over an opponent from a position of apparent disadvantage, cutting them down on the way past. He'd studied it. He'd tried to master it. It was Obi-Wan's defining combat moment, and Anakin had been chasing it for years. Obi-Wan knew this. "Don't try it" was, "I know what you're about to do. I know you better than anyone alive. Please don't." Anakin tried it anyway. He lost both legs and his remaining organic arm in the cut. He fell onto the black bank of the lava channel and rolled toward the edge. He burned, fourth-degree burns across most of what was left of him, severe enough to damage internal organs. He should have died there. He very nearly did. Obi-Wan stood on the bank. He didn't finish it. He couldn't. He said, shouting across the heat and the smoke and the orange light, that Anakin had been his brother, that he loved him. And then he took Anakin's lightsaber and walked back to the ship and left him. He genuinely believed Anakin couldn't survive. He was wrong. He would not discover he was wrong for 10 years. Palpatine arrived and found his apprentice on the bank, had him taken to Coruscant, to the medical facility that would transform what remained of him into something that could continue. The suit was built to maintain his life. That was its primary purpose, a mobile life support system for injuries that should have been fatal. It was also built, as the canon material confirms, to cause discomfort. The design was intentionally restrictive. Palpatine wanted him in constant pain. Pain in Sith philosophy strengthened the dark side connection. The suit kept him alive and ensured that being alive was miserable. His first breath in it is audible. That sound, the rhythmic mechanical inhalation, the exhalation, is one of cinema's most recognizable pieces of audio design. It begins there, in a medical bay on Coruscant, and it will continue for the next 23 years. His first question, in the new voice, from behind the new mask, "Where is Padme? Is she safe?" Palpatine told him that in his anger, he had killed her. This was not exactly true. Padme had been brought to a medical facility and had died there after giving birth to twins she named Luke and Leia. The official medical cause was unclear, something about losing the will to live, which sounds like a euphemism, but may have been literally true in a universe where the Force and emotional states have physical consequences. She said, at the end, that there was still good in Anakin. She believed it. He didn't know about the children. Palpatine concealed this. Luke was taken to Tatooine, to Owen and Beru Lars on the moisture farm. The stepbrothers' homestead Anakin had visited years earlier, under the same twin suns where everything began. Leia went to Alderaan, adopted by Senator Bail Organa and his wife, raised as a princess. The twins were separated and hidden, and their father was told they didn't exist. The medical table cracked under the telekinetic surge when Palpatine told him Padme was dead. The scream that followed was something between grief and the dark side consuming it. And then there was silence. The twins' separation was handled immediately and practically. Bail Organa took Leia to Alderaan. He and his wife had hoped for a daughter, and Leia would grow up a princess, raised by people who loved her genuinely and well. Obi-Wan took Luke to Tatooine, to Owen and Beru Lars at the Moisture Farm, the same farm Anakin had visited years earlier, where Shmi was buried in the desert. Luke would grow up under the same twin suns his father had watched set from Slave Quarters Row. Obi-Wan settled nearby in the desert, watching from a distance, keeping himself ready for a moment that might not arrive for decades. The galaxy didn't notice any of this. The galaxy was absorbing the news that the Republic was now an empire, that most of the Jedi were dead, that a black-armoured figure was appearing at Palpatine's side carrying an authority nobody with any sense questioned. Life continued, as it does, in the ruins of things. Mustafar's name comes from Arabic, Mustafar, meaning the chosen one, the preferred one, the chosen one planet. George Lucas didn't arrive at that accidentally. The name is either a cruelty or a reminder, or possibly both. The suit breathed on. 19 years passed between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. That's a long time to be something you didn't intend to become. The Empire established itself across the galaxy through speed and overwhelming force, and the very significant advantage of having been running the Republic's government when the transition occurred. Most of the institutional infrastructure stayed in place. The Senate remained for a while. Palpatine would dissolve it formally, shortly before A New Hope, and the existing bureaucracy continued, just with different priorities and different people at the top giving the orders. Vader's role in this new order was specific. He was Palpatine's enforcer, the visible arm of imperial power, the thing deployed when conventional persuasion had failed or wasn't worth attempting. He hunted the surviving Jedi. There were a few dozen scattered across the galaxy, hidden, some trying to maintain small lives, and some trying to rebuild something, and some just trying to get through each day. He also oversaw the Inquisitorius, a cadre of former Jedi turned Imperial hunters, and he directed them as tools without particular warmth. The physical reality of existing inside the suit across 19 years is something the expanded canon has explored more thoroughly than the films. He could eat, but only in a hyperbaric chamber with the helmet removed, a pressurized environment that allowed him brief windows of being something less sealed. He slept in similar conditions. The rest of the time he was encased, the suit's amplified sensory systems providing input in place of the organic perception it had replaced. The pain constant enough that it became background noise. He'd stopped registering it as a separate thing. It was just the texture of existing. His personal fortress was built on Mustafar. This is a detail I find difficult to interpret with certainty. He could have chosen anywhere. He chose the planet where the duel happened, where his old body burned, where Anakin Skywalker ended. He returned there repeatedly across 19 years. He meditated there. Whether that was self-punishment or a way of staying connected to something or something else entirely, the story doesn't fully explain. He went back to the place where he died, and he kept going back. There's a canonical comic run from 2015 that follows Vader in the period shortly after Revenge of the Sith, and it's worth knowing about for one particular moment. Through his own investigation, not through Palpatine, but through contacts he'd developed independently, Vader discovers that the pilot who destroyed the Death Star is named Skywalker. Luke Skywalker. He figures out what this means without anyone telling him. The panel after he hears the name is a single page. Just the name, rendered in silence. No dialogue, no reaction shot. Just the name and the space around it. Palpatine had lied to him. Not just lied, had taken the one thing that might have made the loss bearable and hidden it. The children were alive. Padme hadn't died for nothing. everything he'd given up, everything he'd become, and his children had survived, and he had been kept from knowing it. This doesn't redeem any of the years that followed. He continued to serve the Empire. He continued to do terrible things with the efficiency and commitment the Empire required. But something shifted in him at that point, I think, a long question beginning about what he owed the person who had built his world on a lie, about whether the path he was on was the only available path. He sat with that question for a long time without doing anything about it. The officers on Imperial ships navigated serving under Vader with a mixture of genuine fear and careful professionalism. He rewarded competence and punished failure, and the punishment was frequently disproportionate. Force-choking admirals who disappointed him was something that had become, unfortunately, something of an occupational hazard in the Imperial fleet. It was not ideal management style. It was at least consistent and predictable, which was something. The Obi-Wan Kenobi series, set 9 years after Revenge of the Sith, fills in an important gap. Vader tracked Obi-Wan out of hiding, and what follows is 2 encounters that reveal something about what those 9 years had done to him. In one, he tells Obi-Wan, "You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did." He's not absolved by saying this. He's taking responsibility for his own choices, which is its own complicated kind of dignity. He's also refusing the narrative in which Obi-Wan destroyed him. Where Vader is something imposed from outside, he claims it. Obi-Wan apologizes. He says he's sorry for all of it. Vader says he's not his failure. In their second encounter, Obi-Wan gains the upper hand and damages Vader's helmet enough that Anakin's scarred face is visible through the break. He looks at him. He says, "Anakin is gone. He is now truly dead." He's saying this to let go, to close a door, to give himself permission to accept what the previous 9 years have shown him. Vader says, from behind the broken mask, "Then my friend is truly dead." Not his apprentice, his student, my friend, and he lets Obi-Wan go. I think about that moment more than most in the series, because it reveals something about what Vader was carrying through those years. Not just the physical weight of the suit, not just the mission and the Empire and the service to Palpatine, but also a grief he had no outlet for. A grief for who he'd been and what he'd had, dressed up as Darth Vader and walking around in black armor, and occasionally letting people catch glimpses of it at unexpected moments. The galaxy under the Empire was quieter than the Republic era had been. The chaos of the Clone Wars was replaced by the specific silence that comes from people understanding the consequences of certain actions. Life went on. Farmers farmed, children grew up, people fell in love and had arguments and made the ordinary decisions of ordinary lives. But there was a quality to everything that hadn't been there before. A background awareness, 19 years, 2 Death Stars designed and built. The Senate eventually dissolved. The Senate's dissolution was a remarkable act of self-confidence from Palpatine, removing the last institutional check on Imperial power because he'd calculated there was nothing left to check him. He was right in the short term, and somewhere in all of it, Vader carried the question about his son, about what it meant that he existed, about whether it changed anything. The Jedi who survived Order 66 did so in various ways. Some went very deep into hiding, took new identities, moved to planets the Empire had little interest in, and simply became civilians. Some cut off their Force sensitivity as much as possible, not easy and not complete, but enough to avoid detection. Some continued quietly helping people where they could, individual acts in the margins of an imperial galaxy. A very small number tried to do more, tried to organise some kind of resistance, and most of those were found and killed. The ones the expanded canon follows, Obi-Wan on Tatooine, Yoda on Dagobah, Kanan Jarrus and the Ghost Crew in the years before Rebels, survived because they were careful, or lucky, or both. Kanan, who trained his own Padawan Ezra Bridger in the Imperial years, is an interesting case. A survivor who had no intention of being a Jedi again, and and became one anyway, because the situation demanded it, and he couldn't look away. He's very Anakin in some ways, less romantically, rather more practically. The rebellion itself was forming across the same years Vader spent hunting. Bail Organa was one of the architects of it, quietly, carefully, using his Senate position and his political relationships to connect people and resources while maintaining a surface of cooperation with the Empire. Padme's former colleagues, Jedi sympathizers, worlds with genuine grievances. The network grew slowly, in the way that things grow when they have to stay invisible. Vader knew the rebellion was forming. He was involved in suppressing its early attempts. He did this efficiently. He also, I think, found it considerably less interesting than the question of Luke. The rebellion was a military and political problem to be managed. Luke was something else, a person who existed, who was alive somewhere, who had the specific Force presence that made something in Vader very old and very buried reach toward it. There's a detail in the comics worth noting about one of his visits to the Mustafar fortress during this period. He spent time in the Bacta chamber, the depressurized space where the mask could be removed, the brief window of existing as something less armored. And in the meditation he did there, on the planet where everything ended, he was apparently looking for something. What exactly, the canon is coy about. The emotional logic suggests Anakin Skywalker, some version of access to who he had been before. Whether he found it in any useful sense is unclear, but he kept going back. The twin suns were setting on Tatooine when Luke looked out at the desert horizon and felt something he couldn't name. He was 19 years old. His name was a coincidence, officially, one that Imperial intelligence had filed without fully processing. Vader had processed it. Vader had been processing it for 2 years. That question was about to become considerably more urgent. 19 years have passed. The galaxy is fully functionally Imperial now, the kind of settled that comes when a new order has been in place long enough that most people have stopped comparing it to what came before. The Rebel Alliance exists, a scattered and under-resourced collection of people who have come together through shared opposition to Imperial rule, trying to find a way to fight an enemy that outweighs them in every material category. They have pilots and some ships and a great deal of motivated conviction and almost nothing else. A new hope opens above Tatooine. A small rebel corvette is being pursued through space by an enormous star destroyer, and the scale of the size difference tells you everything you need to know about the power imbalance before a word of dialogue has been spoken. The rebel ship is boarded, and then a figure in black steps through a doorway in a cloud of vapour, and the breathing begins, and the stormtroopers on both sides of the corridor visibly adjust their posture, and the whole scene is transformed without anyone saying anything at all. It's a remarkable piece of filmmaking, that entrance. Everything in the composition communicates importance before the character has done a single thing. The height, the black against the white of the stormtroopers, the sound. John Williams' score shifts, and then the helmet comes through the doorway, and if you're watching it for the first time, you have no idea who this is, but you understand immediately that it matters. This is the Darth Vader that most people encountered first, before the prequels existed, the fully formed embodiment of Imperial power. Black armour, the breathing, the absolute authority that fills a room. He's not presented here as complicated, he's presented as terrifying, and the effect holds completely. The backstory that makes him human is 19 years in the future of the release schedule, though decades in the past of the timeline. The film's actual protagonist is Luke Skywalker, 19 years old, on Tatooine, dreaming of somewhere else, which is yes exactly where his father was at a similar age when this all began. The parallels are not subtle and are entirely intentional. On the captured rebel corvette at the film's opening, Vader is looking for stolen Death Star plans. He's also looking for whoever sent them, which turns out to be Princess Leia Organa, senator, rebel leader, and, as Vader would eventually discover, his daughter. Though he has no idea of this here. He interrogates her, he orders her tortured. He does all of this with the particular efficiency of someone who has long since stopped examining the meaning of the work and simply does it. No visible enjoyment, no hesitation, just function. Leia holds up remarkably well under interrogation, which will surprise exactly no one who has spent any time with the character. She lies to Vader's face, feeds him false information, maintains her composure throughout. She is 19 years old, and she does this to the most feared figure in the Empire without flinching. She is her father's daughter in ways she absolutely would not want acknowledged. The Death Star is worth a moment. It was the Empire's ultimate weapon, a space station roughly the size of a small moon, capable of destroying entire planets with a single focused energy discharge. Grand Moff Tarkin, who commanded it, used it on Alderaan. 2 billion people, a planet with no military capacity, no Death Star of its own, no means of defense, gone, in a matter of seconds, to demonstrate what the Empire was willing to do. There's a detail in the canon material that I think is worth knowing. Vader voted against using the Death Star on a populated world. He wanted it deployed as a deterrent, the threat of it, not the use of it. Tarkin overruled him. I mention this not to rehabilitate Vader at this point in the story, because he's still doing genuinely terrible things, and the Alderaan destruction doesn't happen without him being part of the apparatus that enables it. But it's a data point. Something in the armour was still making distinctions. Obi-Wan. This is the part that's strange to think about when you've spent time with the earlier story. Obi-Wan had been on Tatooine for 19 years, watching over Luke from a distance, living as a hermit, waiting for something he couldn't be certain would ever come. He came out of hiding when circumstances required it, accompanying Luke toward the rebellion, and they ended up on the Death Star together through a series of increasingly improbable events. And then Obi-Wan and Vader were in the same corridor for the first time since the Obi-Wan Kenobi series encounter, and the first time since Mustafar, if we're counting only the films. Their exchange before the duel is brief and carries enormous weight if you've been paying attention. Obi-Wan says, "I've been waiting for you, Vader. We meet again at last." He's not afraid. He spent 19 years preparing for this, or for something like it. He made his peace with it somewhere along the way. Vader says, "Your powers are weak, old man." Obi-Wan says, "You can't win, Darth. Strike me down, and I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." They fight. It's brief relative to what came before. And then Obi-Wan sees Luke in the corridor, sees that he's watching, and lowers his lightsaber. He doesn't try to survive. He simply closes his eyes. Vader strikes, the robe falls. Obi-Wan is gone, dissolved into the Force, the way he'd apparently been learning to do in the years of his exile, leaving behind nothing but the cloth. Vader stops. He stands over the empty robe. Stormtroopers are shooting at Luke and his companions as they run for their ship, and Vader is just standing there, looking at the place where Obi-Wan was. I don't know what he was thinking in that moment. The film doesn't tell us, and I'm not sure it should. The pause is there, and then he moves on. But the pause is there. 19 years earlier, Obi-Wan had told him he was his brother, and loved him, and walked away on a lava planet. And now the robe is empty, and the breathing continues, and whatever is happening inside the helmet doesn't reach his face. The Battle of Yavin follows. The rebellion had used the stolen plans to identify a structural weakness in the Death Star, a small exhaust port at the end of a trench that, if hit precisely, would trigger a chain reaction in the reactor. Fighters would have to run the trench under heavy fire and make the shot from an X-Wing at combat speed. Vader flew a TIE fighter personally to stop it. This tells you something about his priorities. He could have directed the defense from the Death Star's command structure, but he was in the cockpit because the cockpit was where he'd always been most himself. He destroyed the X-Wings ahead of Luke in the trench one by one. Luke was in his targeting computer. He was about to fire. Han Solo arrived, fired from above, knocked out Vader's wingmates, clipped Vader's fighter. The TIE spun off into space, tumbling away from the battle. Luke made the shot. The Death Star exploded. In the silence after, Vader floating in the dark. There's something he felt through the Force during that trench run. A presence in the pilot ahead of him. Something familiar in a way he couldn't immediately place. The specific quality of someone who moved through the Force, the way Anakin Skywalker had moved through it. Instinctive, natural, with that particular grace. The name Skywalker was already associated with the pilot in Imperial intelligence reports. The pieces were assembling themselves. 3 years pass. The rebellion has moved around. You can't keep a fixed base when you're outgunned. So you stay mobile, stay unpredictable, stay just ahead of whatever the Empire sends after you. They've had victories and losses, and they're still alive, which, given the balance of forces, is actually a significant achievement in itself. Luke has become more central to their operations. He's not a Jedi yet, not properly. His training has been patchwork, guided by Obi-Wan's Force Ghost, and his own instincts, and a brief period of instruction that will come in this film. But he's clearly capable, clearly powerful, and the Force is clearly doing something through him. The Empire Strikes Back begins on Hoth, a frozen planet where the rebellion has established a base inside a glacier. It is bleak and extremely cold, and about as comfortable as it sounds. Vader has been hunting the rebellion specifically, with a persistence that his officers have noticed. Not the general Imperial campaign to suppress rebel activity, but a targeted, personal search. The probe droid network he deployed across the galaxy to find them is his idea, or at least the one he's pushing hardest. When a probe signals from Hoth, he overrides his officer's recommendation to wait for confirmation. He moves immediately. He's right about Hoth. He's right because the Force gives him information that intelligence networks can't, and because the thing he's hunting has a Force signature he would recognize anywhere. The rebellion evacuates under assault. Luke escapes. Vader, watching the battle unfold from the bridge of his Star Destroyer, is tracking one thing through all of it, and it isn't the military objective. He assembles a team of bounty hunters to find the Millennium Falcon after the evacuation. Assorted specialists, each with different methods. He wants the ship because of who it's carrying. Han Solo, Princess Leia, the people Luke Skywalker will come to rescue when they're captured. He's setting a trap that is really only a trap for one person. The capture happens at Cloud City, a floating mining platform in the atmosphere of a gas giant called Bespin, run by an old friend of Han's named Lando Calrissian, who is in the genuinely difficult position of trying to protect his people when the Empire arrives and makes him an offer he can't refuse. He tries to limit the damage. He mostly fails. Han is frozen in carbonite and handed to a bounty hunter named Boba Fett. Leia and Chewie escape eventually. The Imperial contingent was never really there for any of them. What's worth noticing about Vader in the Cloud City sequences is the patience of it. He arrived before the Millennium Falcon did. He set everything up. He ate dinner, apparently. He waited in a room for his guests to find the table. There's a quality to these scenes that sits strangely alongside everything we know about him. A powerful person in a chair, in a room, simply waiting. He modified the deal with Lando incrementally, each adjustment calculated, none of it hurried. He had all the leverage. He could afford to think. He was there for Luke. That's the whole point of all of it. Luke had a vision of his friends in pain. He couldn't see where exactly, but felt their suffering through the Force, and cut short his training with Yoda on Dagobah to go rescue them. Yoda was extremely dubious about this plan, expressed his dubiousness clearly, and Luke went anyway. He knew it might be a trap. He went anyway, which is rather definitional Luke. The duel in the carbon freezing chamber is the first time they fight. It doesn't go well for Luke. Vader is handling him with something that reads, in retrospect, almost like a demonstration. like a teacher showing a student the distance between where they are and where they'd need to be. He keeps targeting Luke's right arm. He disarms him more than once. He throws objects at him telekinetically, not because it's the most efficient way to fight, but because it tests specific things. He's measuring him methodically, looking for the moment when enough damage has been done to create the conditions for what he came here to say. He's not trying to kill Luke. This is evident if you watch it with that in mind. Luke ends up on a gantry above an enormous shaft that drops into the reactor core. His right hand is gone. Vader took it, a mirror of what happened to Anakin at Geonosis, and of what will happen later in Return of the Jedi in a different configuration. Luke is holding on with one hand. He's genuinely defeated, and Vader tells him the truth. No, I am your father. There's not much to add to that line that hasn't been said in the 40+ years since the film was released. It's one of the most famous moments in cinema. It completely reframes both the character of Vader and the entire trilogy. It makes the story intimate in the most direct possible way. This isn't about the rebellion versus the Empire. It's about a father and a son who don't know each other, and what that means in a universe where the Force connects living things. What I find most interesting about the scene is what comes after the revelation. Vader's offer isn't join the Empire, hey. He says, Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son. He's proposing betrayal of his master. He's not asking Luke to serve Palpatine. He's asking Luke to help him overthrow him. That's what he wants. And when you sit with that offer for a moment, it stops being a Sith Lord recruiting a new apprentice and starts being something more recognisably human. A father who has spent years in a life he chose under conditions that turned out to be constructed entirely of lies, reaching toward the one piece of his old life that survived. He doesn't want a soldier. He wants his son. The distinction matters. Luke says no. He says no and falls into the shaft rather than join him. A fall he survives by luck and the Force and the particular stubbornness that runs in this bloodline. He escapes. Vader doesn't pursue. This is worth noting. He had Luke. He had him defeated on a gantry with nowhere to go. And when the offer was refused, he let him fall into the shaft and then didn't follow. He could have. He didn't. He retreated to his Star Destroyer and did something extraordinary for the most feared figure in the galaxy. He reached across space through the Force, using the connection between them rather than any communication system, and said Luke's name, just the name. Luke heard it across the distance and called for Leia. There's a strange intimacy in that detail. The father and the son, speaking through the Force, neither of them ready for what comes next. Vader knowing Luke refused and reaching out anyway. Not in anger, not with threat. Just, he's there, and I know he's there, and I'm saying his name because he's my son, and I've only just found out he exists. 1 year remains. Return of the Jedi is coming. Something Yoda said before Luke left Dagobah, and something Obi-Wan's ghost told him after. There is another Skywalker. Luke filed that away. It would matter soon. What the year between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi looked like from Vader's perspective is something the films mostly don't address. He returned to the Imperial fleet. He continued his duties. The search for the rebellion went on. The second Death Star was nearing completion, but the encounter on Bespin had changed something in the texture of the situation. He'd made the offer. Luke had refused. The refusal didn't close the question. If anything, it opened it further, because it confirmed what the Force had been suggesting since the Battle of Yavin. Luke was real and powerful and had his own will and couldn't be acquired by force or leverage. He was Anakin's son in ways that went beyond genetics, the stubbornness, the instinct, the refusal to take the reasonable exit when the unreasonable one was available. Familiar characteristics. Vader had killed Obi-Wan on the Death Star and watched the empty robe fall and felt something he didn't examine. He'd offered Luke everything he had to give and watched him fall into a reactor shaft rather than accept it. He'd spent 3 years being the most feared figure in a galactic empire, and both of the people he'd once cared most about in the world had chosen something over him. The pattern says something. He probably spent the year turning it over. There's a sequence in the Darth Vader comic that takes place in this period where he goes to Padmé's old apartment on Coruscant. He doesn't do anything dramatic there. He stands in it for a while. The apartment is empty, preserved by Coruscant's bureaucratic inertia, in that way that places are sometimes preserved when nobody is sure who's responsible for them. He stands in the rooms where they used to meet secretly, in the apartment of a person who died 23 years earlier, still loving him, and then he leaves. I find that image very difficult to describe as anything other than grief. Everything else he was, the armour, the authority, the terror, and underneath it, a man standing in an empty apartment. It doesn't absolve anything. It doesn't change the weight of what he was doing. But it's there. He had 1 year left. Return of the Jedi was coming. Yoda was dying on Dagobah. Luke was somewhere in the galaxy, getting ready. And in the darkness of the Star Destroyer, the breathing continued. The same rhythm it had maintained for 23 years. Steady as machinery, patient as something that has learned to wait for what it wants. Return of the Jedi begins with a rescue. Luke Skywalker, working with his friends, breaks Han Solo out of Jabba the Hutt's palace on Tatooine. It's a complicated operation, with multiple moving parts, and it mostly works, which is an improvement over the average. And Luke in these scenes is different, noticeably, meaningfully different from who he was 3 years earlier. He's quieter, more deliberate, moving with a quality of intentionality that suggests someone who has had time to think carefully about what they're doing and why. He's not there yet, not fully, but he's closer. He goes to Dagobah after, as promised, to complete his training with Yoda. Yoda is dying, 900 years of life finally accumulated to their end, and before he goes, he confirms what the Empire Strikes Back revealed. Yes, Darth Vader is Luke's father, and there is another Skywalker. Yoda is gone before he can elaborate. Obi-Wan's ghost fills in the gap. Leia, Luke's twin sister. The family he didn't know he had is closer than he'd imagined. Luke returns to the rebellion carrying this, and then he does something that no one around him fully understands. He surrenders himself to Imperial troops on the forest moon of Endor, voluntarily, asks to be taken to Darth Vader. The rebellion's plan to destroy the Empire's second Death Star involves destroying a shield generator on the moon's surface, while fighters attack the station from outside. Luke is not part of that plan. He's on his own plan, and his plan is not tactical at all. His plan is to talk to his father, to stand in front of the man who has done everything the previous films have shown, and believe, against all evidence, against everyone else's assessment, that there is something worth reaching for. Obi-Wan had wanted Luke to kill Vader. He'd said as much, fairly explicitly, "You must confront Darth Vader." The implication was clear. Yoda had agreed. The Emperor himself, as we'll get to, wanted Luke to kill Vader as part of a different scheme entirely. Every person with any authority in the galaxy had concluded that Darth Vader was unreachable, unredeemable, gone. Luke was the only dissenting vote, and he held it, alone, against everything. I find this genuinely remarkable about the character. It would be easier to understand if it were naivety, if Luke just didn't know enough to have the appropriate expectations. But he knew. He knew what Vader had done. He'd seen it, heard about it, lost Obi-Wan to it. His belief in his father wasn't the belief of ignorance. It was a choice, a deliberate, eyes-open decision to hold a position that nobody else was holding, because something told him the position was right. On the forest moon of Endor, before the Imperial troops take him to the Death Star, Vader and Luke have a brief exchange. Luke tells him he knows there is still good in him, that the Emperor hasn't driven it out completely. Vader says, "It is too late for me, son." He says it quietly. He says son clearly, openly, without Palpatine in the room. "It is too late for me" is not the same as, "I don't want to come back." Luke heard the difference. It sounds like grief rather than refusal, like someone who has accepted a sentence, rather than someone who has chosen one. Vader still brings Luke to the Emperor. He does what he's supposed to do, follows the structure he's lived inside for 23 years. He tells Luke that the Emperor will show him the true nature of the Force. He's saying the expected things, but the voice saying them sounds, if you listen carefully, like it's performing certainty rather than feeling it. Palpatine's plan in the throne room is one of the more elegant pieces of villainy in the saga. He wants Luke to kill Vader in anger, take Vader's place as Sith apprentice, and then at the moment of Palpatine's own death, if that moment arrived, be taken as a host for his consciousness through an ancient Sith technique of essence transfer. He needed Luke to act in darkness, in hatred, in the specific emotional state that would make him susceptible to possession. The whole setup was designed to produce that state. He was not expecting what actually happened. The Emperor taunted Luke through most of the sequence, showed him the rebel fleet being destroyed outside the window, made clear that the battle was lost, and the only remaining question was whether Luke would join him. Luke remained seated. He looked at his father. He looked at the window. He stayed seated. They fought, eventually. Vader pressed him into it, used Luke's fear for Leia as a lever, said the words that broke Luke's composure for about 30 seconds. Luke attacked with the aggression the Emperor had been trying to manufacture all along. He drove Vader back across the throne room, forced him down, cut through his mechanical right hand with one strike. Vader knelt, defeated, on the floor. The Emperor leaned forward. Good. Now strike him down, and your journey to the dark side will be complete. Luke stopped. He looked at Vader's mechanical hand, sparking where it had been severed. He looked at his own mechanical hand, where his had been replaced after Cloud City. 2 generations of the same wound. 2 people who had each, in a moment of rage, cut off the right hand of someone they loved. 2 people who had each become something worse afterward. He threw away his lightsaber. "I am a Jedi," he said, "like my father before me." That phrase, like my father before me, is doing considerable work. He wasn't saying Vader was a good person. He was saying Vader was the Jedi he once was, and claiming that lineage as his own, and refusing to be the thing the Emperor needed him to be in order to complete the trap. Palpatine responded by trying to kill him. The Force lightning came down on Luke, and it was brutal and extended, and Luke cried out in pain, called to Vader, asked for help. "Father, please!" Vader rose. He rose, which required effort. He was physically diminished, and had been for 23 years. The suit designed, as we discussed, to constrain him. The injuries from Mustafar never fully healed under the armour. He rose anyway. He looked at his son writhing on the floor. He looked at the Emperor. Back to Luke. Back to the Emperor. The breathing continued, steady as machinery, while something underneath it moved. He picked up Palpatine, walked to the edge of the reactor shaft, and threw him in. The lightning coursed through his body as he did it. Palpatine's last act, redirected through the armour, burning the circuits of the life support system that had kept him alive for 2 decades. He was already dying as he walked back toward his son. He knew it immediately. He accepted it with a calm that, given everything, he had probably earned. Luke tried to carry him to a shuttle. Vader stopped him, said, "Luke, help me take this mask off." Luke said if the mask came off, there'd be nothing left, that he needed the suit to breathe. Vader said, "Nothing can stop that now. Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." Luke removed the mask. The face underneath was scarred and pale, almost without colour, a man who hadn't seen natural light or breathed unfiltered air in 23 years. He looked at his son with his own eyes, and he smiled. It's the only time in all 6 films of the main saga that we see Anakin Skywalker's face in an expression of uncomplicated feeling. He told Luke, "Now go, my son, leave me." Luke said he would not leave him, that he had to save him. Vader said, and this is the line that gets me every time, "You already have, Luke." Then he asked Luke to tell his sister that he'd been right, that the good was still there, that she'd been right to believe it, and then he died. Luke brought his father's body back to the forest moon of Endor. He built a funeral pyre in the woods, away from the celebration the Rebel Alliance was having a short distance away, and he stood alone and burned the armour. He stood and watched Darth Vader burn, and what the fire left behind was a twisted, empty suit and a charred helmet that still somehow looked like something, though the something it had been was gone. When the flames had settled, he walked back to the celebration, and he saw Obi-Wan Kenobi's Force ghost in the firelight, and Yoda's, and beside them, young as he had been before the armour and Mustafar, and the fear as he had been before all of it, Anakin Skywalker. Not Vader, Anakin, standing at peace. Padme had said there was still good in him. She'd said it when she was dying, when everything she'd believed about him had been systematically dismantled. She said it anyway because she meant it. She was right. The cost of her being right was enormous. Decades, lives, worlds. The accounting of everything Vader had done doesn't disappear because the ending was redemptive. The story knows this. Leia visited the funeral pyre the next morning and found the charred helmet in the remains, and picked it up and could not forgive him and threw it back. She was his daughter too, and she had spent her entire life carrying what he'd done without knowing who had done it, and forgiveness for her was not available on the same timeline it was for Luke. Both of those things are true. They're both real parts of the story. The redemption and the things that don't disappear because of it. The story holds both without flinching, and that's rather why it lasts. And that's the whole arc. From a desert planet to a Death Star. From a boy in a junk shop who built a protocol droid for his mother to a dying man asking his son to let him see him properly, just once, with his own eyes. From Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader and, at the very end, back again. It spans roughly 45 years of in-universe time. In terms of actual content, films, series, comics, it spans decades of storytelling across multiple media. And the thing that holds it all together, the axis around which the whole enormous structure turns, is one person's relationship with fear. Specifically, the fear of losing the people he loved, and what that fear became when nobody gave it anywhere useful to go. I find this story differently weighted depending on when I come back to it. When I watched the original trilogy first, very young, Vader was just the thing you were supposed to be afraid of. By the time the prequels arrived, there was a complicated person in there. By the time I'd spent time with the Clone Wars series and the comics and all the texture that fills in the gaps, it had become something else again. A very detailed portrait of how a specific kind of person, in a specific set of circumstances, with a specific unaddressed wound, comes apart. And how, eventually, something from the beginning of it survives. The Sun Dragon story. Shmi told Anakin he was the Sun Dragon because she wanted him to know that loving things fiercely was strength rather than vulnerability. He almost proved her wrong. It took 45 years, and his son's voice saying, "Father, please," and everything that followed, but not quite. Just barely not quite. The heart that was always the biggest one in the galaxy found its way back at the very end, and Shmi Skywalker, who died in a Tusken camp with no way of knowing whether any of it would hold, was right about her son. I think about that a lot, the specific faith of a parent in a child, the specific hope of that. The Skywalker saga, the 6 films we've covered tonight, is at its root a story about inheritance. What we receive, what we pass on, what we do with the things handed to us that we didn't ask for and couldn't have refused. Shmi gave Anakin the capacity for love and the knowledge that it was worth something. He couldn't use it the way she intended. The circumstances wouldn't allow it, and the people around him weren't equipped to help, but it was still there, dormant, buried under 23 years of armour and pain, but there. And Luke received the inheritance of both of them, and found a way to be what Anakin had tried and failed to be. Not because he was better exactly, because he was luckier in his circumstances, And because he had one thing Anakin never had, someone who believed, without conditions and without wavering, that there was good in him worth reaching for. Obi-Wan wrote Vader off. Yoda wrote Vader off. The Rebellion wrote Vader off. The entire galaxy wrote Vader off. Luke didn't. That's the specific act of faith the story asks us to understand. Not blind, not naive, just held deliberately against all evidence because something insisted on it. The Clone Wars series, if you want more of this world, which I'd recommend, fills in the years between the prequels and the original trilogy with a great deal of care. The Ahsoka series and Star Wars Rebels and the Obi-Wan Kenobi show all add texture to the Imperial era. There are comics that go places the films couldn't, and novels that fill in backgrounds, and if you go deep enough, you'll find years' worth of material. I'll cover more of it in future videos, a full Clone Wars breakdown, and probably a standalone on Ahsoka, who is one of the most interesting characters in the whole universe, in my view. But for tonight, that's the story. 45 years of one life in a galaxy far, far away, beginning in a junkyard on a desert planet and ending in a forest on the moon of a gas giant with a pyre burning in the dark, and a Force ghost standing in the firelight, looking young again. It's a good story to carry into sleep with you, I think. Not easy exactly, but good in the way that stories are good when they take their characters seriously enough to tell the truth about them, the kind